Welcome to the Power of Love show, sponsored by the D.D. Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. Enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone, to the Power of Love show, sponsored by the D.D. Jackson Foundation. My name is TJ Jackson, and with me is my eldest brother, Taj Jackson. How's it going? How are you, man?
Good. Doing well.
Very, very good. Today's date is June 26th. Of course, it's Wednesday, a little past 1 p.m. But for those who are watching for the very first time or listening for the first time, we do this live every Wednesday at 1 p.m. So make sure you subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or follow on Facebook, or what would it be called for podcast, Taj? I think subscribe as well, right?
Yeah. Subscribe to a podcast.
Anyways, yes. Oh, and if you already have watched our show and enjoy the show, please, especially for you podcast listeners, consider leaving a review. A positive review goes a far way for podcasts. It helps those who may be looking for this type of content. It helps the algorithm feed it to people who need it. So please, if you do enjoy the show and you listen on the podcast, leave a review for us on what the show does for you, what you like about the show. And like I said, it helps others who may be needing this content. It helps them find it. Now, before we get on to how our weeks were, there's a disclaimer that we need to mention. And that is that we are not licensed therapists. We are just ordinary people who've experienced loss in our lives. We've been impacted by it, and we have learned from it. And what we like to do here on the Power of Love show is share our opinions in an attempt to help you get through whatever it is you are going through. Saying that, if you need professional help, we urge you to seek it and to find it. Please do not just rely on us. Now, Taj, this is show number.
What show number is
this? We're up there, man. We're 321. 321.
Ooh, 321. I like that number.
This fan is above me. It's just spinning. It's getting cold. But anyways, yes, we've done 320 other shows about a variety of topics on grief, loss, with the whole intention to inspire you and to let you know that you are not alone, to give you information and to hopefully make your world a better world to live in. So again, we encourage you, if whatever it is you may be going through today in your personal lives, think about or consider going back and checking out the catalog, because we've talked about so many different topics that I think there's a show out there that can help you in a very immense way today. Taj, that is it for my spill. I got to get going with the intro. I know I feel talkative today. I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to go first. Go first. You sure? I feel like I'm hogging the show already.
No, go for it.
Okay.
I don't want to ruin your flow.
Okay. Trust me. I know we are musicians. We're not really TV hosts or hosts of shows, so we gotta ride our flows. But the reason why I think I'm so involved in today's show is I am doing a 3-day fast, Taj. I am in day 2 of the fast. I haven't eaten since almost 43 hours ago, I was about to say. And they talk about a mental clarity that comes when you are fasting. And I like to think that's what's going on right now. I'm feeling everything seems to be a little bit slower, which is, they say the brain fog disappears. So I'm intending to do the fast until Friday morning, which is a 3-day fast, but I'm really trying to squeeze out a 4th day. And I'm saying this to you, Taj, and to everyone out there. Consider doing a couple-day fast. It could be very healthy for you and help reset your so many things. So again, this isn't medical advice. Don't just do a fast because I said. Please make sure it's okay with your doctor. But yeah, that's what's been going on with my week. Nothing too exciting. In a couple of days, it's my wedding anniversary, so that's exciting. But that's in the future. We'll talk about that next show. I'm curious to know, how was your last week, Taj?
The same. Pretty much the same. I'm very curious because, obviously June 25th, yesterday, was a big day
Oh
for
yeah,
us, that way,
yeah.
especially since we're on a show about loss and grief. And, one of our mentors and a family member that we looked up to and kind of helped shape us who we are, basically, he passed away yesterday. Well, not passed away yesterday. It's the anniversary of his passing.
15 years.
15 years since that. And I think you tweeted about it in that way, and I tweeted something in that. But do you still does it affect you the same way, or is it more like explain that to me in that
When you
way?
say, does it affect me, you're talking about the day or just the everyday without Uncle Michael?
Well, I know every day with that. I know
Yeah.
that every day affects you, but is that day a specific day that you feel it more, or no, not really?
Taj, I'd like to think that I've graduated to your mentality on this, where it's not as painful as a day as it was in the
Hmm.
first 5 to 8 to 10 years. Now it feels like more celebratory. I'm able to get into that space of celebrating who he was. And I've said this before. I don't know if I've said it here. I'm not celebrating any of the artistry stuff. I'm
Yeah.
celebrating the human. I've said this and I'll say it forever. Uncle Michael was the world's greatest uncle and mentor. He was there for me way beyond what most people would be, and I'm so grateful, honored, and feel so blessed and lucky to have had him in our lives, in my life, for as many years as I did. His guidance, his inspiration, his strength was huge for me. And I'm guilty is the wrong word, but I'm feeling like I'm realizing as I get older that everyone didn't have that. And
Yeah, that's
again,
important.
to be one of the world's most famous people on the planet and to still be there the way he was for, I'm going to say for me, but for his nephews and his family, the way he, and his friends, the way he was while living with us, is something I'll never be able to understand. How he was able to do so much and accomplish but feel so present in my life is a mystery. And I'm celebratory of who Uncle Michael is. How about you? I'm curious to know your feelings towards June 25th,
Yeah,
15
it's
years
interesting.
later.
Yeah, the date itself doesn't really resonate in terms of where I feel any different in that way. I mean, I miss him every day in that aspect of it. I feel lucky that we were able to be so close to him. You know, you mentioned even with mom's passing, when mom, way back when, he was one of those that swooped in and literally helped us and I don't, save's a hard word, but it is almost like that aspect of it. He came in and really, that was probably the worst feeling to have ever in that way. And
Mm.
he came in and gave us that little glimmer of hope, that little light that, that life can possibly move on in that way. And so that is what I think, that is kind of what I try and celebrate, even though it's a weird day to celebrate him, but it's either celebrate him or mourn him. And I
Mm-hmm.
choose to celebrate him on that day. So that's why, I started doing that. And I know you do that as well in that aspect of it. Because otherwise I would have to, I think it's always good to remember the person, for what they've done.
Yeah. Well said, Taj. Well, before we get our special guest to join us, I wanted to know anything else you want to share beyond just Uncle Michael's passing day of yesterday that happened in the last week for
See,
you?
I can't
Yeah,
remember that far
I
away.
can't either.
I'm on kid control, where I'm just literally every day is I'm just trying to get to the next day and make sure they're fed, they're happy, and they
I
go to
get
sleep.
it.
You know,
I get it. I'm laughing because I can relate to that, and I feel like I'm slowly coming out of it. But I remember being so enthralled in that world, and it's like I said, 3 under 6 is not easy. So praise to you, my man. All right, so then let's do it. Let's get right into our show, because we have like I
I'm
said,
excited. Yeah, let's
yeah,
do it.
we have a very special guest with us On today's episode of the Power of Love Show, we are welcoming Kathy Wagner. And Kathy is the mother of 3 grown children, including her son Tristan, who died from fentanyl poisoning in August 2017. Since that time, Kathy has actively advocated for improved access to quality addiction recovery services and was a peer support group facilitator for Healing Hearts Canada. Her interviews have appeared on CBC's The National, the Vancouver Sun, and many local newspapers and radio shows. Kathy has published personal essays in the New York Times, as well as the Globe and Mail, and was awarded a position at the Banff Centre for the Arts Summer Writing Retreat in 2019. She is an experienced public speaker who has presented to large audiences at numerous conferences in a professional capacity. Kathy's wish is to bring hope to parents who are lost in the darkness of their child's addiction or are struggling with the child's drug-related death. Kathy's memoir, Here With You, is the powerful story of a mother's struggle to save her son from addiction and the strength and hope for change that she found in her grief. Ladies and gentlemen, here today to share more about her work, as well as her book, Here With You, a memoir of love, family, and addiction. Without much further ado, please welcome the one and only Kathy Wagner to the Power of Love Show.
Hello. Thank you so much for such a great introduction.
You are more than welcome. Kathy, real quick, before I even, did I say that right? The Banff Centre for the Arts?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I assume Canada.
It is, although they do have participants from all over the world. But
okay. Well, we are so honored and feel so blessed to have you joining us to talk. As you know, this show is all about grief, how to deal with it. So you being here means a lot to us in our community. So thank you.
Yes.
I want to kick off, Kathy, if you could start by sharing a bit about your background and what inspired you to write Here With You, a memoir of love, family, and addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. I've written professionally in different capacities my whole life, but I have never considered myself a creative writer or an author or anything like that. But Here With You is the story of my experiences living through my son's addiction, recovery, relapse, and death, and how the hope and healing that he found in recovery continues to heal our family and will for generations to come. When Tristan, my son Tristan, was in recovery, was the first time that I actually began focusing on my life for myself rather than for my kids or other people. You know, it sounds so obvious for those of you who have always lived for yourself, but many of us have a tendency to live for others. And as I began that part of healing myself, realizing, I need to focus on myself, there was hope for my son. And in the midst of that, he passed away, and my hope bubble was, kind of capsized. But I wasn't prepared to give up that hope that I had just found. I knew it was real, regardless of what was going on in the world around me. And I really wanted to hold on to that hope. And part of writing this book was for a way for me to hold on to that and then to share it with others.
Just a quick question. So you were mentioning, as a parent myself of many kids, and Taj is going through now, as Taj said in the intro, you live for your kids for so long, and oftentimes you forget yourself. When you started to, and I'm going through this now where I'm starting to put me first and do what, and I don't know if it's an age thing. I don't know if it's experience. I don't know how it works for individuals, but it was at that time where Tristan lost his life.
Yeah. So he was, we were both in, he entered addiction when he was 15, and we had a very close relationship, and, did some, pretty dramatic things. We went to China together and, a variety of things, but I really struggled with finding a way to save him, quote unquote. So when he went into recovery, I began a program of recovery of my own, originally through his treatment center parent support group. And I thought I was going into that support group learning how to be a better parent for him, where in reality, I was learning that no, actually, I have a life of my own to live. And it was through that group and the connections I made there with other mothers that I began for the first time to think, oh, I can think about who do I want to be in this world? How do I want to show up? How am I going to find purpose outside of my kids, although they'll remain a part of my life? And then, yes, in the midst of that, as I was just kind of progressing through that, he passed away.
Was it hard for you, Kathy? Did you ever feel, not guilt's not the right word, but did you ever feel like you could have done more? Although I don't agree with that. And I think I feel the best way for us to be anything, a parent, a brother, a friend, is to take care of ourselves first and really prioritize ourselves. But in the thick of it, I can assume some people would feel some type of way about that. Did that ever come across for you?
Well, I think that there's a couple things. I never felt selfish or guilty for learning to live for myself in that last year of Tristan's life. Having said that, I carried and still do to some degree, although I'm working on it, but I have never known a single mother, and I've talked to hundreds at this point, who has not felt a sense of guilt when they have lost a child to addiction and mental health and drug-related issues. And because our job is to raise healthy, well kids. And when we don't, it feels like our fault, right? And particularly raising a kid in addiction is an impossible task. There is no parental advice you can get that actually works when dealing with a kid in addiction. You can't ground them. You can't, take away their Nintendo. You can lay boundaries and, various things, but there's complexities. I have talked to parents who have used tough love. I've talked to parents who have open doors. And if you lose a kid, you're going to feel guilty because I honestly believe that's part of the package, and that's part of what you need to work through. I know I did the best I could. I know without question, I did the absolute best I could. And that's what I just have to keep coming back to.
Thank you for sharing that, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you. And how did you get such strength, though, for that aspect of it? I really admire that because, I know you mentioned the book in that way, but please elaborate that because I really do admire that.
As far as strength, I'm not sure which part you're talking about, the dealing with addiction or dealing with the grief. Both of them are the same. I actually was at my cousin's house. I hadn't seen my cousin for 20 years. We did a little family road trip thing. And he had read my book and he came out to me and, he had some kind words about it. And then he said, my wife read it too. And she said, she doesn't know how she would survive if her kids died. I'm amazing because she doesn't know how she would survive. I hear that from so many women. How do you do it? I could never do it. The reality is I couldn't do it either. And it wasn't strength that brings me through. It was just my body kept breathing for a period of time. My world was broken. It was as broken as anybody else's. And eventually you are alive and you're alive. And I think this is where, for me, where I drew my strength, if any, but I would call it more a resilience, is because I had experienced that hope and healing when Tristan was alive. I knew it was possible. And I connected with a group of other family members who have lost loved ones to drugs. And I could see people who were, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years ahead of where I was. And they had a life that was still fulfilling. So I was able to find role models and see, okay, it's possible. I was able to look back and think, okay, I know I can learn to live for myself no matter what. And those two things kind of kept me moving forward to, I kind of kept that as my North Star to head towards. And eventually, I got to a point where I was able to feel joy again. And then for a long while, It was so much more joyful to feel joy and connection because I had lost it for so long in the immediate months of grief, that when it came back, I was so very, very grateful for the ability to have connections and to be joyful. I really held on to that.
It's a great
Wonderful.
answer. I appreciate it because there's people that are watching or listening that are in the new of a serious loss and grief, and I like it because you've went through that and come out, years later in a different mental space. But you also added how and why. You had those mentors, you had the North Stars, you had those that experienced a very similar thing as you did, and they were just years away from it and had a different mentality about it. And that's really cool to say. So thank you very much. Yeah. Can I rewind a bit and talk about the beginning, when your son Tristan, when he first began experimenting with drugs at 14? You told yourself it was just a phase. Can you describe the moment you realized it was more serious and the impact that realization had on you and your family?
Yeah, it's interesting because my oldest daughter, partied, drank, and used drugs as a teenager, and I always felt that was a phase she was going through. Many of the people I grew up with did, and everybody kind of grew out of it. So when Tristan started using drugs, I wasn't happy about it by a long shot, but I wasn't overly concerned. And the moment that everything shifted in my head is one that I write about in my book, and it seems so odd to even say because it's such an everyday occurrence. But I saw him watching TV. We were gathered and we were watching Intervention, which is a show where people who use drugs are offered, rehab and treatment and so forth. And my other daughter Tanis and I were watching the show together. Tristan was there, and Tristan was not very interested, except when the person who was on screen using drugs, he just glommed on, like his whole, his body, his interest. He was like he was watching, it was like he was watching porn or something. He was like so absorbed in it. And then as soon as that scene ended, he just kind of deflated and he wasn't interested in the rehab. He was just so connected to that visual of using drugs. It seemed bizarre to me. It seemed very unusual to me. I realized then that he had a different relationship with drugs than anybody I had been that close to. And that it wasn't going anywhere, that was his North Star. And he was going to follow it wherever it went. How that particular realization, affected me is that was the impetus for me to begin to reach out and try to find help for him. So I tried to get him into rehab, which is impossible, like literally impossible, when a child doesn't want to go. So he was 15 years old at the time, and rapidly from that point on, his behaviors were erratic. He dropped out of school. He dropped out of martial arts. He stopped doing the things that, he loved doing. But still, he got to make the call about whether or not he needed mental health care and addiction treatment. And he didn't think he needed it. So I was my hands were tied there, and I had to be very creative about finding ways to help him. And the only thing he had really shown an extreme passion about previously was his Taekwondo and martial arts. He'd already had a black belt in Taekwondo, and he was working towards another one, although his training got a bit shaky. And so I ended up offering to take him to China to study Kung Fu with Shaolin monks for a year full time. And, there was some drama around whether he'd go or didn't go and whether he'd actually make it or be well enough to make it. But he did eventually go. And that was one of the most beautiful experiences. I was there for 5 weeks with him. And, that was a beautiful experience. But the realization that he was struggling with addiction as opposed to recreational drug use, it became probably the single biggest factor around which our whole family dynamics was based from that point on. It became all about, how do I save him? I can't
Yeah,
hear
you
you.
muted.
I'm back. I'm back. I hit my
I was
mic.
like, oh.
I appreciate sharing that whole the whole answer, Kathy,
Mhm.
very much. Okay, you talked about family dynamics. I'm curious to know, how did Tristan's addiction, like specific, how did it affect your family relationships, and then also how did you navigate those challenges, especially being a single mother?
I navigated them by the seat of my pants, which is not. It's not a new. I tried. I did
Yeah.
find. I'm an avid reader. I read everything I could find. I reached out to find support. I did join a support group for parents who have kids at risk of drug harms. That was not very useful for me. That particular group was not. Was honestly, it was very depressing. I just heard a lot of very. I heard a lot of horror stories and not a lot of hope. So that group actually did more damage than good for me. So I tried my best, but I really was uneducated, unarmed. I didn't have the experience to really understand any of it. I just tried. I always operated from a place of love, but I just did the best I could. It was like I said, it really became all about Tristan. Can I get him to China? And honestly, he did well in China. Like, he was there for a year, and then he went back for another 6 months, and he did exceptionally well when he had that kind of structure and exercise, and we at home got a chance to breathe and relax.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some guilt around that. I
Mm-hmm.
loved having him home when he was well, but he was hell on wheels when he was not well. And so then I would find other things, culinary schools. He was a kid with passion. Like, whatever he did it large. When he was cooking up a storm. When he was martial arts, he was winning awards. And when he was using drugs, he was all out. So I think we all tiptoed around his moods. And I know that my middle daughter was sandwiched between an older sibling who was a bit of a troublemaker and a younger one who was full on in addiction. And, we still talk. She doesn't necessarily feel that she got the attention that she deserved. And I'm sure she didn't. So how I did it was the best I could. And if I had to do it again, I'm sure I would have learned some things. But I honestly believe that if any parent who is parenting a kid in addiction and does the absolute best they can and does it from a place of love is a hero, because it's harder than anybody would imagine.
That's great.
Well said, yeah.
I want to highlight a question from Tordia, who says, any advice or things that would be helpful to parents that are struggling with the child's drug addiction? Is there anything that comes off the top of your head that you could relay to anyone out there?
Yeah, I think my number one thing is don't do it alone. And I think today more than ever, you don't have to do it alone. One of, I had said that I had reached out for support, and I found a group that was not particularly useful for me. And I'm sure that there are groups that will resonate and groups that won't, therapists that resonate, therapists that don't. Find one that does. And be open-minded. One of the things when Tristan was in addiction, I refused to go to Al-Anon or Nar-Anon, which is it's like the AA version for family members, because of what I had perceived it to be based on some movies that I had seen and what I thought it was, a bunch of sad sacks all down in the bottom of a church basement complaining. It's not. Later on, I had very, very different experiences and very positive experiences with that group. So be open-minded and judge for yourself. But I would say, like, there are so many more supports for people who have loved ones in addiction now than there used to be. You don't need to do it alone. And I don't think you can. Like, it's not healthy to do it alone. Yeah. Because people who have not experienced it do not know what it's like. And they tend to want to give advice to you as a parent that is absolutely not remotely appropriate.
And then sometimes, because they can't relate to it, they're not really I don't want to say helping, but they're not able to do anything. So
Yeah.
it's a slippery thing and a difficult thing to navigate. But let's keep it simple and make sure you reach out to people who have the experience and you don't do it alone.
Yeah.
Now, since Tristan's passing, you've become an advocate for improved access to addiction recovery services. What are some of the biggest gaps you see in the current system, and what changes do you hope to see in the future?
Well, there's a couple of major problems. Well, there's many major problems. One is the fact that that it's political. This is a healthcare problem that has become a political issue. So every different kind of facet of organization that helps people who use drugs or who are in addiction are vying for money from the same political pockets, and then they end up fighting each other rather than coming together. So there are huge organizations that do a lot of really fantastic work in harm reduction, which is helping to make sure that people who are still using drugs are staying safe while they do it. They're staying alive. They're getting the support services they need. And then there's organizations that help people in abstinence-based recovery when that's what they need and want. And there's a lot of infighting there, so that it breaks the credibility of all of the camps when what we need is an all hands approach from A to Z, so that we can meet people where they're at, wherever they are at in their recovery journey, which is not a linear and easy, approach. And the other thing is regulation. Tristan was lucky and in that he ended up in treatment centers that were, fundamentally, honest and doing good work. And there are a lot of recovery treatment centers that are not, because they are not regulated. And there are many that take advantage of at-risk populations. And there's no regulation around that to monitor or make sure that they're actually providing services that they're intended to. So lots of room for improvement, lots of work to be done.
Kathy, can you tell us about in addition to being an author, you have a role as a peer support group facilitator for Healing Hearts Canada.
Yeah, I did that for a while. I'm currently not doing that. But for me, that was a really important part of my thing to give back. As I said, when I was new in grief, I really, I was really inspired by people who were a few years ahead of me. So I took that as an opportunity to facilitate a support group where people, who had recently lost loved ones to drug harms came together. And it was honestly such an honor to be able to hold people's grief. We all grieve, and all grief is grief. But when you suffer a traumatic loss, such as sudden loss to drug harms, death by suicide, murder, violence, there is another layer of complexity that make that a complex traumatic loss that is layered on. There's a layer of stigma, there's a layer of shame, there's layers of guilt, there's all sorts of what ifs, or if only, shoulda, woulda, coulda. There's all sorts of anger, and being able to create a safe space and be in a safe space where people to share those stories. Honestly, that was one of the biggest honors of my life.
Mm. And not only sharing the stories vocally, and we're going to talk about your memoir in a minute, but you've also published essays in notable publications and attended the Banff Centre for the Arts Summer Writing Retreat. How did writing, because we always try to inspire our community to write, whether that's music or poems, but to write as a source of getting through or helping them navigate through their grief. I'm curious to know for you, Kathy, how did writing become a part of your healing process, and what was it like to share your personal experiences publicly?
Yeah, it was a process. It was the main way that I processed my grief. So I actually, while I was engaged with, some online support groups, I did not actually attend a grief support group. I didn't go to therapy. I wrote my book. And for me, very early on in grief, writing was just a way to get things out. And I wrote a number of things that certainly did not make it into my book. That was just cathartic, getting it out. And I think there's so much value to just not hold everything inside. And whether you do that through writing or singing or dancing or talking, it doesn't matter, but just getting it out of your body is a healing act. Then when I began to write the book, then I was a little bit more thoughtful about it. And I was very fortunate in that one of my first writing coaches was also a family therapist. So she was able to help coach me kind of through some of the emotional stuff and feel safe in sharing that. For me, even early on, I remember writing some scenes that now seem very lightweight compared to some other scenes that eventually made it in, and talking to her saying, oh, I wrote this because I needed to write this, but I don't think I can put it in the book because I can't, people can't know about this. And, she coached me through that and realizing that, well, two things. One, it actually didn't read as bad as it felt to me. Like a reader would not be as impacted as by me. And one of the things that became clear as I was writing this book is what I really wanted to convey to people is that secrecy is problematic. For people that have addiction, secrets keep them isolated. For family members who have loved ones in addiction, our secrets keep us isolated from connecting with each other. So I really wanted to be able to share my full experiences openly to encourage others to know, again, that they are not alone. Nothing that I felt as a parent, nothing that my child did in addiction was unique to me. So I really wanted to reach out, and that helped me to get some of the more difficult parts on the page.
I put up the picture of your book. It's at Shop Local, which is that a Canadian store?
It's not a store. I think that's just an image to encourage people to go to their independent local bookstores.
Okay. Thank you for that, Kathy. I was like, oh,
it
that's
makes sense
cool name.
now.
Yeah. But there is Target and Amazon, which us in America are very familiar with, and the world knows about Amazon. So make sure you all check out Here With You, a memoir of love, family, and addiction by Kathy Wagner. And Kathy, before I go on to another topic, I'm curious to know, who is this book for? Who would you say this book who would benefit greatly from this book?
I dedicate this book. I'm going to read it word for word because there's the dedication of the book goes to every parent who has been challenged to let their child walk their own path, however painful, while finding meaning in their own. So I think that there's something here for many, many parents. Early on, of course, I thought, I want to dedicate it to Tristan, but this book is not for Tristan. This book really is for other parents or other people who have loved ones that are, that you need to let go to live their own lives.
That's it. So
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tosh.
Because I just always find this amazing when someone goes through something like this and then leaves something for someone else in terms of what they wish they would have had, basically, for themselves. Is that kind of your situation where this is the book you wish you would have been able to read?
Absolutely. I literally had myself 10 years ago in mind as I was writing this book, certainly in the first couple drafts. And I have heard from people who have read it, saying that this book has made more difference to them in their understanding of themselves and their kid in addiction than so many of the other things that they have worked through. So I know that it really resonates with people.
Right. Thank you. Yeah.
Kathy, after Tristan's death, you traveled the world to be alone with your grief. What did you learn about yourself during that time, and how did it contribute to your healing journey?
Yeah, interesting. It's like, it sounds so romantic, traveling the world and all the rest of it. But when you're that new in such a traumatic loss, it didn't really feel like traveling the world. I left home because I needed to be alone. I did not know how to be at home without Tristan. I didn't know how to be as a part of my family anymore without him in it. Like, I literally didn't feel like I could do it. So I'm also not that great at, really expressing my emotion. Like, I like to be strong for others. So here I was in deep grief. It was easier for me to grieve alone than it was for me to try to look after everybody else who was looking after me. So I went away. And for me, the healing that came, in those first few months of me being gone was really just from me having space. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it. I kind of feel like being in community would be a much better experience. But for me, that's what I needed. I needed to be alone, so that I could feel things, so that I could process things, so I could, not try to monitor or manage myself or look after anybody else's needs. So for me, that was really important. And, another thing, as painful as that early grief period was, I also was quite numb for a lot of it. I lost the ability to feel things. And there was a time where I was not even sure I'd be able to love my daughters in the same way, because I didn't know that I had access to, like, I couldn't feel it. I couldn't really tap into those emotions. And that scared me too, because, my family has been everything. And so after a period of times, and it was about 8 months, I came home for, I think a month around Christmas. But other than that, then I was gone again. It took me quite a while before I knew I needed to come home to actually do the healing part. It's like I feel like I had traveled, and that allowed, the wound to kind of scab over and stop pouring blood. But I needed to come home back to my family to actually heal in, as part of the family. And that's what happened. And I came home, and I absolutely was able to love my kids and my granddaughter wholeheartedly again.
How did you decide where to go and how long you were going to go for? Was it did someone give you advice on what to do, or was this just something you wanted to do? And how did you pick the places?
I think traveling had always been part of my dream. And I was kind of considering that before Tristan passed. I was starting to think, I work in an industry where I could work remotely as long as there's internet connection. I was renting, so I don't have to worry about that. I was thinking, for the same cost of my rent, I could live in these other places. So those thoughts I'd already had before he passed, but I hadn't seriously pursued it. So after he passed, I just needed to get away, and I already had that as a concept. So I really just went on Airbnb and found places that, that I could afford based on, if I was giving up my house, my rental, what else could I afford? And airfare based on if there were conferences within my industry, so I could kind of balance some of that with some work costs and write that off. And it was really quite random. I did tend to go for places that I felt would be kind of more open and more healing, sunny places, warm places. But yeah, I ended up in a small town fishing village in Portugal for 6 weeks.
Wow.
Back home, then over on Ladysmith, which is a small town on Vancouver Island, very near to us. And then I was in Costa Rica for another 6 weeks.
Wow.
I had planned another leg going to Bali, but I canceled that because at that point I knew I just needed to come home. I was ready to come home at that point.
When's, in your opinion, from your experience, when's the best time to offer help to our youth who are at risk of substance abuse? And what early signs should parents and caregivers look out for?
I'm a strong believer that help should be offered when they're about 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. And I think that in many cases, if we were educated enough and knew enough and understood enough, the evidence is there, or at least the risk factors are there. So my son, for example, we come from a family where there is addiction in the family on both sides. He was always very hypersensitive, very, very empathetic, took on everybody's emotions, very hard on himself, emotionally dysregulated. He had a hard time making friends. These are just parts of his characteristics. Any one of those conditions is fine, but together they actually do create a higher risk for substance abuse. And I think if we were able to identify those kinds of traits, particularly then if there's trauma involved in their lives in some way, and make sure that they had a sense of community. They learned emotional regulation. They learned how to be in community. They had, mentors or, partners that helped them feel and learn about friendship and feel like they fit in. I think that would be the most helpful and something that would help parents to navigate these things, and not just dismiss, I dismissed Tristan as just being a bit of a bubblehead, right? Instead of really understanding where that came from in terms of attention deficit, for example. And then as, in teenagers, again, of course, I think honestly, if it's a little bit late at that stage, if nothing else has set the stage at that point, there needs to be more support for parents and caregivers. And I think youth who are using drugs problematically need to know that there's another way. They need to know that recovery is actually fun, that recovery is something, they can look up to people who are in recovery, so they see that as a viable option when and if they feel like stepping away from the problems that drugs are causing them.
Your son was in addiction recovery, but relapsed and passed away. Now, you've said that his recovery was not a failure. Can you elaborate on this perspective and what it means for families dealing with similar situations?
Yeah, he was in a lot of pain in addiction, and in recovery, he felt so much pride. And when he came into recovery and he was abstinent of drugs, and that was both a combination of what was available to him and his choice. But he created new relationships with me, with his dad, with his sisters. He created new friends, lifelong friends. And even though his life was short, they would have been friends no matter how long. He had a sense of purpose. He was giving back to community. He was an active and giving part of community. He was helping others. So he was an amazing man, and he was able to show up in the way that he wanted to and that we needed him to. And there is nothing in the world that can say that that was not a success. And the fact that, over a year later, he, and it wasn't a straight line. He did go in and out a little bit, but over a year later, he passed away. If there was any other, problem where you were unhealthy and then you were well for a period of time and then your disease came back, nobody would say, oh, that period of recovery was not worthwhile. It's like, hell yeah, that period of recovery gave us all a chance to really get to know each other and appreciate each other in a way we hadn't been able to in his addiction.
That's such a great way to see it. And
definitely.
Thank you for sharing that. We are almost at the time where we're going to close out the show, but I wanted to make sure, Taj, you didn't have any extra questions for Kathy.
I really like how you closed that last thing out in that way, because it was a great way of looking at it in that.
I agree, Taj. It's such a losing anyone, and especially as a parent, I think it's easy to fall into a very obviously we're all going to fall into dark moments and spaces, but if we could find the positive side of things, and I love how you said when he was in recovery is when you got the best, Tristan, and there are a lot of good memories. So that's a cool way to see it.
Well, I liked how she used the word disease in that way, because that really said it for me in that, because addiction is a disease in that way, and we don't sometimes associate it in that way. So that's what resonated to me in that.
So, Kathy, we usually end our shows by giving our guests a final minute or two to share with us anything they want to talk about. Could be on topic or off topic. So I want to, on behalf of my brother and our foundation, give you those couple of minutes. You can take even more if you want to share with our community anything Kathy Wagner wants to share with.
Thank you. I'm actually going to read just one page from my book. It's a 2-minute passage, and this is a section I've never read out loud before, but I just felt it was fitting because well, I'll tell you why I think it's fitting afterwards. I do just want to give a quick trigger warning, because it does deal with the ideas of religion and God in context of grief, and that's a very personal thing for many people, and this has just been my experience in a conversation with it, but acknowledging people have very different relationships with that concept.
Thank you.
One evening in midwinter, I trudged up the hill, yoga mat strapped to my back, to have dinner with my cousin Kimiko before going to a deep stretch yoga class together. We chatted as we chopped vegetables, and she prepared her version of okayu, a hearty Japanese congee, adding extra vegetables and an egg. After bringing the food to the table, we sat, and Kimiko spread her hands and said grace. For food in a world where many walk in hunger, for faith in a world where many walk in fear, for friends in a world where many walk alone, we give you thanks. Kimiko's words were peaceful. Words and peaceful energy spread a sense of calm, which I appreciated, and then promptly disrupted. You know what I really hate? I asked, surprising myself. I hadn't been consciously thinking about Tristan or his death, but it was suddenly on my mind. Kimiko waited for me to continue. I hate when people tell me that Tristan's death was God's will, or that he was taken early because God needed him, or some other bullshit. I just cannot wrap my head around his death being part of God's plan. As a United Church minister, Kimiko was more in tune with God's plan than anyone else I knew, and I appreciated her progressive perspectives. She often referred to God in the feminine as Mother Creator, and understood the values of Christian stories as allegory and parable, rather than preaching them as literal facts. I don't think it was God's will that Tristan died, Kathy, she said. I believe it was God's will that Tristan lived and healed and became well. That's her will for all of us, to live in a state of love and connection and grace. She'll always guide us in that direction if we listen. And humans have been blessed with personal choice in all things, and the choices we make are not always in alignment with God's love. I'm not just talking about Tristan's choices, but all of us as a society. Tristan was trying his best, but help is limited. People are judgmental about addiction, and the drug supply is poisoned. That's why Tristan died. None of that was God's will. That's the society that we, as humans, have chosen to create for ourselves. And I'll stop there. But what really touched me about that message when I heard it was that we are responsible for creating an environment that helps to heal people. And right now, I believe that our society does a spectacularly good job of creating people with mental health issues and addiction issues because of the shame, the stigma, the lack of resources, the lack of support, the lack of connection. And we need to do a better job of creating connection and compassionate care for people.
Well said. Well said. We did lose TJ, by the way, so I will just take over as the older brother in that way. Really love the passage in that way. I really love how you write in that very descriptive, very. I felt like I was there in that way, and I'm saying that in a great way because I know that our listeners will definitely resonate with that aspect of it. In that, so great choice on your last words. TJ will probably come back right at the end, and claim that he's always been there. But I think we've already said the last words in that way. We will be back next week. I've never closed out a show, so this is it's the first. You when we were first doing this, we had a first in terms of we couldn't hear you.
That's
you
right.
couldn't hear us. And it was that, but this is a very first time that I've had to close the show. But I do want to thank you. I did actually, since I'll be professional, and I do think we have some comments to read in that way. Let me see. Carol says a support group is helpful, which yeah, definitely. In that way, some of these we might have gone through, so I'll just age 45 and started researching this and a poignant effort to find joy in all the little things. All right,
that is so important. That's such a great way to start to bring joy back to yourself, is find it in those little things, and they're everywhere.
And hold on to those little things in that way. Yeah, I mean I remember when my mom passed, it was the little things that I really held on to. As that word hope is always so strong and important. As long as you have that glimmer of it, you can, Okay, we did that one already, and I think okay, so I think we're caught up. TJ's back, so I'm
Yeah,
gonna
I'm back.
so I was
I
saying
don't
that I've
know.
never closed out a show, so I was hoping you'd come back in that way.
Well, it took me some time, and I missed the last part. But I
Don't
want to
worry,
say, Kathy,
your older brother took
I love your writing style, and
what I said. Yeah.
I think you spoke from a very authentic and real place, and I think that's going to connect with a lot of people. So, very
You said
appreciative.
exactly what I just said. I just
It's
want you to know
true. It's true.
that's how much I
Um,
influence. No, I'm just kidding.
it's true. Taj, I don't have the access that I should. Can you put up the book one more time just so people
Yes.
see it? And that way the podcast listeners or the viewers that are watching on Facebook and YouTube can see the cover again. It is, let me see. There we go, Taj. The book is called Here With You, a memoir of love, family, and addiction by Kathy Wagner. Again, shop local, not a store, but just a little
Which
push,
you learned
nudge
today.
to support your local bookstores. But in case you need to, you can also get it on Amazon.com. And for us, at least here in the States, I assume in Canada as well, you can go to Target.
And Barnes
But
and Nobles, wherever you buy your books.
wherever
Okay.
you buy your books,
Even your libraries, you can ask to bring it in.
Oh, nice. Yes.
Yeah.
it's available now. Kathy, thank you so much for joining the Power of Love show. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for making a difference. It's one thing we can relate to is once we started doing the podcast, it felt a little more light in our lives, and everything felt a little easier. So from what I gathered from today's show, it seems similar to you, and I'm just appreciative that you're contributing to that content for grief so people can find different ways to help themselves heal. So, with all that said, I think we're done, Taj. I think we can wrap up. I apologize again for my lack of internet, but this is live, and that's what happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
Kathy,
for having me and for all that you do. Thank you.
absolutely, and thank you so much. And to everyone who's watching, we will be back next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Please be safe, and that's it. I'm going to end the stream. All right, adios, everyone. Take care of yourself, and thank you again, Kathy.